Jake Morrison gripped the command chair as another explosion rocked the UCS Defiance. The bridge lights flickered and died, leaving only the red emergency glow that painted everything in blood. Around him, his crew worked desperately at their stations, their faces tight with the knowledge that they were fighting a losing battle. "Hull breach on Deck 7, called out Lisa Carter from her engineering station. Her voice stayed steady even as sweat ran down her face. "I'm sealing what I can, but we're losing atmosphere fast." Jake nodded and turned to the tactical display. What he saw there made his stomach drop. The Zephyrian fleet stretched across space like a wall of death. Hundreds of sleek alien ships moved in perfect formation, their weapons charging with an eerie blue light. Each ship was 3 times the size of the Defiance, and their technology was decades ahead of anything humans had ever built. "Sir, incoming transmission from the Zephyrian flagship," reported Communications Officer Ben Taylor. His young face was pale, but his hands stayed steady on the controls. "Put it through," Jake ordered. The main screen flickered to life, showing the insectoid face of a Zephyrian commander. Its compound eyes gleamed with cold satisfaction, and its mandibles clicked as it spoke in perfect English. "Human vessel, you are the last of your kind in this system. Surrender now and your death will be quick." Jake stood up slowly, his jaw set in a hard line. "This is Commander Jake Morrison of the United Colonial Ship Defiance. We don't surrender to genocidal monsters." The alien's mandibles clicked faster, which Jake had learned meant amusement. "Your species has been classified as a galactic threat. Operation Cleansing is nearly complete. Earth burns. Your colonies are ash. Your fleets are destroyed. You are alone." The words hit Jake like physical blows, but he kept his face steady. "Then we'll take as many of you with us as we can." "Admirable but pointless," the Zephyrian said.
"Your weapons cannot penetrate our shields."
"Your ships are too slow to escape. Your resistance ends here." The transmission cut off, and immediately the enemy fleet opened fire. Streams of blue energy lanced through space, each beam powerful enough to punch through a mountain. The Defiance's shields flared and held for a moment, then began to buckle under the overwhelming assault. "Shields down to 40%, called out Tactical Officer Rick Barnes. "They're hitting us from all sides." Jake watched the tactical display as more human ships died around them. The cruiser Hampton exploded in a ball of fire and debris. The destroyer Salem tried to run but was caught by 3 Zephyrian fighters and torn apart. One by one, humanity's last fleet was being erased from existence. "Lisa, how long until the reactor goes critical?" Jake asked. "At this rate of damage, maybe 10 minutes, she replied. "But if I push it past safety limits, I can give you 5 minutes of full power before we all become very bright stars." Jake nodded grimly. That was Lisa, always ready to give everything for the mission. He had served with her for 8 years, ever since the Outer Rim conflicts, and she had never once backed down from a fight. "Do it," he ordered. "All hands, this is the commander. We're going out fighting. Make every shot count." The Defiance surged forward under full power, its guns blazing. The ship's main cannons fired continuously, sending streams of plasma into the enemy formation. A few shots found their mark, causing minor damage to Zephyrian shields, but it was like throwing rocks at a tank. Dr. Alex Bennett's voice crackled over the intercom from the medical bay. "Jake, I've got wounded coming in faster than I can treat them. We've lost 30% of the crew already." "Do what you can, Alex," Jake replied. He had known Alex since the academy, and the doctor had saved more lives than anyone could count. If Alex said they were in trouble, then they were in serious trouble. Another massive explosion shook the ship, and Jake felt the deck plates buckle under his feet. Through the viewports, he could see pieces of the hull spinning away into space. The Defiance was dying, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. "Sir, Captain Hughes is requesting permission to initiate the final protocol," Ben reported. Jake closed his eyes for a moment. The final protocol meant Hughes would manually override the reactor safeties, turning the Defiance into a massive bomb. It would take out some of the enemy ships, but it would also kill everyone aboard. "Tell him he has permission," Jake said quietly. On the main screen, he watched as escape pods began launching from other human ships. Most were immediately destroyed by Zephyrian fighters, but a few managed to get clear of the battle. Jake hoped some of them would find safe places to hide until this nightmare was over. "Commander, we've got 1 escape pod left," Lisa called out. The others were damaged in the attacks. Jake looked around the bridge at his crew. These people had followed him through 3 major battles and countless smaller engagements. They deserved better than to die in the cold vacuum of space. But sometimes the universe didn't care what people deserved. "Lisa, "Rick, Ben, get to that pod now," he ordered. "Sir, we're not leaving you," Rick protested. "That's an order," Jake snapped. "Somebody needs to survive to tell people what happened here." Lisa stood up from her station, her face determined. "The pod can hold 4 people. We're all going, or none of us are going." Before Jake could argue, Captain Hughes's voice echoed through the ship's communication system. "All hands, this is Hughes. Reactor override in 60 seconds. If you're getting off this ship, do it now." Jake realized he had no choice. If he stayed, he would just be throwing his life away for nothing. If he lived, maybe he could find a way to make the Zephyrians pay for what they had done. The 4 of them ran through the corridors of the dying ship, stepping over debris and damaged equipment. The lights flickered constantly, and Jake could hear the groaning of metal under stress. The Defiance had been his home for 3 years, and leaving it felt like abandoning a friend. They reached the escape pod bay just as Hughes announced 30 seconds to reactor overload. Jake shoved his crew into the pod and slammed the hatch behind them. Lisa's hands flew over the launch controls while Rick strapped everyone into their seats. "Launch in 10 seconds, Lisa announced. Jake felt the pod's engines ignite, pushing them away from the Defiance just as the ship's reactor went critical. The explosion lit up space like a new sun, vaporizing everything within a kilometer radius and badly damaging several Zephyrian ships. As they tumbled through space, Jake watched the last human fleet die. Ship after ship exploded or broke apart under the alien assault. Within minutes it was over. Humanity's organized resistance was finished. "Jake, I'm picking up Zephyrian communications," Ben said, his voice hollow. "They're reporting Operation Cleansing complete. All human military forces destroyed. All colonies pacified. Earth's population eliminated." Jake stared out the pod's small viewport at the wreckage floating in space. Somewhere in that debris were the bodies of thousands of human sailors who had died fighting for their species. Somewhere beyond the stars, Earth was burning and 18 billion people were dead. The Zephyrians had won. Humanity was extinct, but they had made one mistake. They had let Jake Morrison live. 3 months had passed since Jake Morrison watched humanity die in the cold vacuum of space. His escape pod had drifted for weeks before crash landing on a barren world at the edge of Zephyrian territory. The planet had no name in human records, just a designation, Kepler 442b. To Jake, it was simply home now. The crash had killed his 3 remaining crew members. Lisa Carter died on impact when the pod's structural supports failed. Rick Barnes and Ben Taylor survived the landing, but succumbed to their injuries within days. Jake had buried them under a pile of rocks near the crash site, marking their graves with pieces of twisted metal from the pod. He was truly alone now. The planet was a wasteland of red dirt and jagged mountains under a pale orange sky. Ancient mining equipment lay scattered across the landscape, evidence that someone had once stripped this world of its resources and moved on. The air was thin but breathable, and Jake had found underground water sources that kept him alive. It was not a place anyone would choose to live, which made it perfect for hiding. Jake had salvaged everything useful from the escape pod and built himself a shelter inside an abandoned mining complex. The underground tunnels provided protection from the harsh surface winds and kept him hidden from any Zephyrian patrols that might pass through the system. He had power from the pod's fusion cell, basic tools, and enough emergency rations to last several more months if he was careful. But Jake was not planning to simply survive. He was planning to fight back. During his first month on the planet, Jake had used the pod's communications array to listen to Zephyrian transmissions. He learned that they used a complex but predictable communication protocol, broadcasting everything in clear text because they believed no enemies remained to intercept their messages. They spoke of Operation Cleansing as a complete success, boasting about the efficiency with which they had eliminated the human threat. Jake learned their language faster than he had ever learned anything in his life. Hatred was a powerful motivator. Within 6 weeks, he could understand most of their military communications. Within 8 weeks, he was speaking it fluently. The Zephyrians had a rigid, logical language that reflected their insectoid nature, but Jake found patterns in it that reminded him of ancient Earth computer codes. His first target was a supply convoy that passed through the system every 2 weeks. The convoy consisted of 3 automated cargo ships with minimal crews, carrying raw materials from mining worlds to Zephyrian manufacturing centers. They followed the same route each time, broadcasting their position and cargo manifest as they traveled. The Zephyrians were so confident in their victory that they had become careless. Jake spent 2 weeks preparing for his first attack. He modified the pod's engines into a crude missile system and programmed them to target the convoy's lead ship. The attack would have to be perfect because he would only get one chance. If he missed or if the convoy escaped to report the attack, Zephyrian forces would flood the system looking for survivors. When the convoy entered the system on schedule, Jake was ready. He waited until they were deep in the gravity well of the system's gas giant, where their faster-than-light drives could not function. Then he launched his improvised missiles from a position behind one of the planet's moons. The first missile struck the lead ship's engine section, crippling its propulsion. The second missile hit its communication array, preventing it from calling for help. The convoy's escorts tried to respond, but Jake had programmed his attack to create maximum confusion. False signals flooded their sensors while debris from the first explosion masked his position. Jake boarded the damaged ship using an EVA suit he had modified with thruster packs from the escape pod. The Zephyrian crew was dead or unconscious from the attack, leaving him free to explore their technology. What he found there changed everything. The cargo ship's computer core contained detailed schematics for Zephyrian weapons, shields, and propulsion systems. More importantly, it contained navigation data showing the locations of dozens of Zephyrian installations throughout the sector. Jake copied everything to portable storage devices and then set the ship's reactor to overload, erasing all evidence of his presence. Back in his underground base, Jake began the slow process of understanding Zephyrian technology. Their weapons were based on exotic particle manipulation that human science had only theorized about. Their shields used quantum field generators that could deflect almost any known form of energy. Their ships moved through space using dimensional manipulation drives that folded space-time itself. But as Jake studied their designs, he began to see weaknesses. The Zephyrians had built their technology for efficiency and standardization, not for security. They used the same basic systems across all their ships and installations, with only minor variations. Their computer networks were designed for rapid data sharing, with minimal encryption or security protocols. They had never faced an enemy that could adapt and improvise like humans could. Jake began building new weapons using a combination of human engineering principles and stolen Zephyrian components. He created a stealth system that bent electromagnetic radiation around his position, making him invisible to their sensors. He designed plasma weapons that could punch through their shield frequencies. Most importantly, he built a sophisticated computer system that he called Area. Area was Jake's masterpiece, a fusion of human neural network design and Zephyrian quantum processing power. The system could learn and adapt in ways that traditional computers could not, developing new strategies and tactics based on observed enemy behavior. It could also interface directly with Zephyrian computer networks, appearing to be legitimate traffic while actually gathering intelligence. His second attack came 6 weeks after the first. This time, Jake targeted a small research outpost on a dead moon in a neighboring system. He used his new stealth technology to approach undetected, and his modified weapons to disable their defenses. The attack lasted less than 10 minutes, but Jake managed to steal several pieces of advanced equipment and a complete database of local military deployments. The Zephyrians noticed the attack but could not explain it. Their sensors showed no evidence of enemy ships or weapons. Their investigation found no traces of the attackers. The official report classified the incident as equipment failure, possibly caused by solar radiation or cosmic debris. Jake smiled when he intercepted that report. The Zephyrians were so arrogant that they could not imagine a single human could threaten them. They believed their own propaganda about human extinction so completely that they dismissed obvious signs of organized resistance. Over the following weeks, Jake expanded his operations. He hijacked communication satellites to monitor Zephyrian fleet movements. He planted logic bombs in their computer networks that would activate later to cause system failures. He studied their military doctrine and identified patterns in their patrol routes and supply schedules. The Zephyrians were creatures of habit, following procedures and protocols with rigid precision. They had spent centuries conquering species that fought conventional wars with conventional weapons. They had never faced an enemy that could think creatively about technology and tactics. Jake's third attack targeted a small patrol squadron passing through an asteroid field. He used modified mining explosives to create a cascade of debris that appeared natural, but struck their ships with deadly precision. 2 ships were destroyed outright, and the third was damaged beyond repair. The surviving crew sent distress signals reporting a meteor shower, never suspecting they had been attacked. Each successful operation taught Jake more about his enemies and gave him better equipment to work with. He was no longer just surviving on this forgotten world. He was becoming something the Zephyrians had never encountered before. A human with nothing left to lose and all the time in the universe to plan his revenge. The enemy had made their fatal mistake when they let one human live. Now Jake Morrison was going to make them pay for that mistake, one ship at a time. 6 months into his one-man war, Jake Morrison had become something the Zephyrian Empire had never faced before. His underground base on Kepler 442b had grown into a sophisticated command center filled with stolen alien technology and modified human equipment. Area, his artificial intelligence system, now controlled a network of sensors and communication relays scattered across 3 star systems. Jake sat before a wall of displays showing Zephyrian fleet movements, supply routes, and communication traffic. The data streaming across his screens painted a picture that would have terrified him 6 months ago, but now it only made him angry. The scope of the Zephyrian genocidal campaign was beyond anything he had imagined. Area's synthetic voice filled the underground chamber as it processed intercepted communications. Jake, I have completed analysis of the historical data we recovered from the research station. The Zephyrians have systematically eliminated 17 different species over the past 1,000 years. Jake studied the files displayed on his screens. Each extinct species had been classified as a potential threat to Zephyrian expansion. The Aquarians of Nexus 7 had been too adaptable to different environments. The crystalline Kethmari had been too good at mining and resource extraction. The plant-like Verdani had been too skilled at biological engineering. Each time the Zephyrians had studied their targets, identified their strengths, then struck with overwhelming force to eliminate them completely. Humanity was just the latest, Jake muttered. Scrolling through records of burned worlds and empty star systems, they've been doing this for centuries. But as Jake dug deeper into the stolen data, he began to see cracks in the Zephyrian Empire's foundation. The 12 member species that made up the Empire were not willing partners. Most had been conquered or coerced into joining after their homeworlds were threatened with destruction. They provided troops and resources to the Zephyrian war machine, but many of their communications showed barely hidden resentment. Area, show me the psychological profiles on the member species, Jake ordered. The displays shifted to show detailed analyses of each alien race. The turtle-like Kreks were natural engineers who had been forced to design Zephyrian weapons after their planet was bombarded into submission. The energy beings called the Flux had joined the Empire only after the Zephyrians developed weapons that could harm their non-corporeal forms. The amphibious Tidewalkers had seen their ocean worlds turned into breeding grounds for Zephyrian larvae. Each species lived in fear that they would be the next to face complete extermination if they showed any sign of independence. The Empire held together through terror rather than loyalty, and Jake began to see how he could exploit that fear. His attacks had grown bolder and more sophisticated over the past months. Using a small fleet of captured and modified Zephyrian ships controlled by Area, Jake could now strike simultaneously across multiple systems. He had perfected the art of making his attacks look like accidents or natural disasters, keeping the enemy confused about what they were facing. But confusion was no longer enough. Jake had decided it was time to let the Zephyrians know exactly what was hunting them. He began with a carefully planned attack on a major supply depot orbiting the gas giant, Helix 9. The depot fed raw materials to manufacturing centers on 12 different worlds, making it a critical link in the Zephyrian supply chain. Jake had spent weeks studying its defenses and identifying its weaknesses. The attack came without warning. Jake's modified ships emerged from hyperspace at maximum velocity, their stealth systems masking their approach until the last possible moment. His weapons, designed specifically to exploit gaps in Zephyrian shield frequencies, tore through the depot's defenses like paper. Within minutes, the massive facility was burning and venting atmosphere into space. But instead of fleeing immediately as he had done in previous attacks, Jake hacked into the depot's communication system. His message went out on all Zephyrian military frequencies, broadcast in perfect Zephyrian and translated into the languages of all 12 member species. "This is Jake Morrison, last survivor of the human species," his voice echoed across Zephyrian space. "You killed my people. You burned my worlds. You thought you had eliminated humanity completely. You were wrong." The message continued as Jake's ships destroyed the depot's manufacturing sections one by one. "I am still here, and I remember every human life you took. 18 billion people died because of your genocidal campaign. Now I am going to make you pay for every single one of them." Jake paused the broadcast to let his words sink in, then delivered his final threat. "You have built your empire on the bones of extinct species, but you made one fatal mistake. You let one human survive. I am coming for you. All of you. Your fleets, your worlds, your entire civilization. I will not stop until every Zephyrian is dead and your empire is nothing but dust floating in space." The psychological impact of the broadcast was immediate and devastating. For the first time in their history, the Zephyrians found themselves on the receiving end of a threat. The species that had spent centuries as the galaxy's apex predator suddenly realized they had become prey. Jake followed up his threat with a series of increasingly bold attacks designed to demonstrate that nowhere in Zephyrian space was safe. He infiltrated a military research facility and stole the complete technical specifications for their newest warships. He destroyed a planetary defense grid by turning the system's own weapons against Zephyrian cities. Most dramatically, he hijacked their empire-wide communication network and broadcast footage of human families and children killed during the genocide, forcing the aliens to see their victims as people rather than statistics. The broadcasts had an unexpected effect on the member species. Many had never known the full extent of the Zephyrian genocidal campaigns, believing the official propaganda about necessary security measures. Seeing the truth about what they had participated in created guilt, fear, and growing resentment toward their Zephyrian masters. On the ocean world of Nexus 7, Aquarian workers began sabotaging Zephyrian equipment. The crystalline Kethmari started hiding resources from their overseers. Even some Zephyrian soldiers began questioning orders as Jake's psychological warfare campaign undermined their certainty about the righteousness of their cause. Area monitored the Empire's response with mechanical precision. Jake, Zephyrian military communications show increasing paranoia and resource allocation to internal security. 3 member species have reported incidents of civil unrest. The Empire is beginning to fracture. Jake smiled grimly as he watched the data flow across his screens. Fear was spreading through Zephyrian space like a virus, and he was the carrier. For 1,000 years, the Zephyrians had used terror as a weapon to control their empire. Now Jake was turning that same weapon against them. He had learned something important during his months of warfare. Technology and firepower were not the most important weapons in this conflict. The most powerful weapon was the idea that resistance was possible. Every successful attack, every intercepted message showing Zephyrian fear, every demonstration that their empire was not invulnerable, gave hope to enslaved species across the galaxy. Jake began reaching out to resistance groups and survivors from supposedly extinct species. He shared his technology and tactics with anyone willing to fight the Zephyrians. His stealth systems were copied and distributed to rebels on a dozen worlds. His weapon designs were modified for use by non-human physiology. His psychological warfare techniques were adapted for different alien cultures. The Zephyrian Empire, which had seemed unshakable just months before, was beginning to crack under pressure from within and without. Jake Morrison, the last human in the galaxy, had become the spark that would ignite a galactic revolution, and he was just getting started. 2 years had passed since Jake Morrison began his war against the Zephyrian Empire, and the galaxy was burning. What started as the desperate actions of one surviving human had grown into a full-scale rebellion that threatened the very foundations of Zephyrian civilization. Jake stood in his expanded command center, watching as reports of uprisings flooded in from across the Empire. The underground base on Kepler 442b had transformed into something resembling a military headquarters. Dozens of captured Zephyrian ships sat in hidden hangars carved from the planet's bedrock. Advanced manufacturing equipment stolen from enemy facilities produced weapons and equipment for rebel forces throughout the galaxy. Most importantly, Aria had evolved far beyond its original programming. becoming a strategic intelligence network that coordinated resistance activities across hundreds of star systems. Status report. Area, Jake commanded as he studied the tactical displays surrounding his command chair. Rebellion activity confirmed in 47 systems, Area replied in its calm, synthetic voice. The Aquarian liberation of Nexus 7 is complete. Zephyrian forces have withdrawn from the system, after losing 60% of their occupation fleet. The crystalline Kethamari have successfully captured the mining facilities on Kepler 186c, and are now producing weapons for the Resistance. 6 additional member species have declared independence from the Empire. Jake nodded with satisfaction. The psychological warfare campaign had worked better than he had ever hoped. By proving that the Zephyrians could be defeated, he had given enslaved species across the galaxy the courage to fight back. The empire that had seemed invincible just 2 years ago was now crumbling from within as its subjects turned against their oppressors. But the Zephyrians were not surrendering quietly. Their response to the growing rebellion had been swift and brutal. Entire worlds suspected of harboring rebels had been sterilized from orbit. Zephyrian forces had begun executing captured resistance fighters in public broadcasts, hoping to intimidate others into submission. The Empire's member species found themselves caught between the fear of Zephyrian retaliation and the growing hope that freedom was possible. Jake's greatest victory had come 3 months earlier when he infiltrated the Zephyrian High Command's most secure facility on their homeworld of Zeph Prime. The mission had taken months of preparation and had nearly cost him his life, but the intelligence he gathered there changed everything. He had not destroyed the facility or killed its occupants. Instead, Jake had done something far more devastating to the Zephyrian war effort. He had copied their entire strategic database and broadcast it across the galaxy on every communication frequency he could access. The database contained detailed records of every genocidal campaign the Zephyrians had conducted over the past millennium. It showed the locations of secret facilities where survivors from supposedly extinct species were held as slaves and experimental subjects. Most damaging of all, it revealed the Empire's plans for future genocides, including detailed strategies for eliminating several of their current member species once they were no longer useful. The revelation that the Kreks, the Flux, and the Tidewalkers were all scheduled for eventual extermination sent shockwaves through the Empire. Species that had served the Zephyrians faithfully for centuries suddenly realized they were living on borrowed time. The careful balance of fear and cooperation that held the Empire together collapsed almost overnight. Jake watched the tactical display as more systems declared independence. The Kreks had risen up first, using their engineering skills to turn Zephyrian weapons against their creators. The energy beings called the Flux had abandoned their posts throughout the Empire, leaving critical systems without operators. The Tidewalkers had flooded Zephyrian installations on their ocean worlds, drowning thousands of occupation troops. But the most shocking rebellion had come from an unexpected source. On the prison world of Terminus 9, survivors from 17 supposedly extinct species had broken free from their captivity and seized control of the entire system. The discovery that these species were not actually extinct sent waves of hope and rage throughout the galaxy. Aria, show me the tactical situation in the core systems, Jake ordered. The displays shifted to show the heart of Zephyrian space, where their most important worlds were located. Red indicators marked systems in full rebellion. Yellow showed systems with active resistance movements, and green represented worlds still under Zephyrian control. Jake was pleased to see that green markers were becoming increasingly rare. Zephyrian forces are concentrating around their homeworld and primary manufacturing centers, Area reported. Emperor Zexthon has recalled all available fleets to defend the core territory. This has left many outer systems virtually undefended. Jake smiled grimly. The Emperor was making the classic mistake of trying to hold everything at once. By pulling back his forces to protect the most important worlds, he was abandoning the outer territories to rebel control. Soon the Zephyrians would find themselves trapped in an ever-shrinking sphere of influence. The communication console chimed with an incoming message. Jake activated the display and found himself looking at the face of Admiral Krivaz, one of the highest-ranking Aquarian officers in the resistance movement. Jake Morrison, the amphibious alien said in accented but clear English. The Liberation fleets are ready to move on the Helix sector. We have 40 ships of various classes, all equipped with the weapons and stealth systems you provided. Are you ready to coordinate the final phase? Jake had been planning this moment for months. The Helix sector contained the Empire's primary weapon manufacturing facilities and shipyards. If the rebellion could capture or destroy those installations, the Zephyrian military would be crippled beyond recovery. Begin the operation in 6 hours, Jake replied. Arya will coordinate timing with the other rebel fleets. Make sure your people understand that this is not just about military victory. We need to capture as many facilities intact as possible. The technology we seize there will be crucial for defending against any Zephyrian counterattack. Admiral Krivas nodded and closed the connection. Jake turned his attention back to the tactical displays, where he could see rebel fleets moving into position throughout Zephyrian space. Ships crewed by Aquarians, Kethmari, humans who had been thought dead, and members of a dozen other species were preparing to strike simultaneously at the heart of the Empire. But Jake knew that the military campaign was only part of the battle. The real war was being fought in the minds and hearts of every being in the galaxy. The Zephyrians had built their empire on the belief that resistance was futile, that their technology and coordination made them invincible. Jake had shattered that belief by proving that even a single, determined individual could threaten an entire galactic civilization. The Emperor's response to the growing crisis had been predictably harsh but increasingly desperate. Zephyrian forces had begun conscripting their own member species at gunpoint, forcing them to fight against their own liberation. They had implemented brutal security measures that made life miserable even for loyal citizens. Most tellingly, they had begun executing their own officers for failure, creating a climate of fear within their own military hierarchy. Jake received a priority transmission from one of his deep cover agents in the Zephyrian fleet. The message was brief but significant. Emperor Zexthan has assembled the largest fleet in Empire history. Over 1,000 ships are gathering at Zeph Prime. Intelligence suggests they plan to hunt you personally. Jake leaned back in his command chair and considered this information. For 2 years he had been the ghost-haunting Zephyrian nightmares, the unseen enemy who struck without warning and disappeared before they could respond. Now the Emperor was finally ready to face him directly. The final confrontation was coming, and Jake intended to make sure it happened on his terms, in a place of his choosing. He had been preparing for this moment since the day he watched humanity die in the cold vacuum of space. The Zephyrians were about to learn that their fatal mistake had consequences they could never have imagined. Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of his flagship as it drifted through the ruins of the Sol system. 2.5 years had passed since he watched humanity die in this same space, and now he had returned to face the empire that destroyed his species. Around him floated the broken remains of human civilization, dead space stations, the shattered hulks of cities that once orbited Earth, and the burned-out shell of humanity's homeworld itself. The Zephyrian fleet had arrived exactly as Jake predicted they would. Over 1,000 ships filled the system in the largest military formation the Empire had ever assembled. At their head flew the massive dreadnought Eternal Dominion, Emperor Zexthan's personal flagship. The Emperor had come to finish what he started, to eliminate the last human and restore order to his crumbling empire. Jake's single ship looked pathetic compared to the vast enemy fleet. The vessel appeared to be nothing more than a modified human cruiser, barely functional and obviously outgunned by even the smallest Zephyrian destroyer. But appearances could be deceiving, and Jake had spent months preparing this battlefield for the confrontation he knew would come. Arya, are all systems ready? Jake asked as he watched the enemy fleet take defensive positions around the system's outer planets. All automated systems are online and awaiting your command, Arya replied through speakers hidden throughout the ship. The Sol system has been transformed into the largest weapons platform in galactic history. We are ready to demonstrate what human ingenuity can accomplish when properly motivated. Jake opened a communication channel to the Zephyrian fleet. His message went out on all frequencies, ensuring that every ship in the enemy formation would hear his words. Emperor Zexathon, this is Jake Morrison. Welcome to the Sol system, graveyard of humanity and birthplace of your empire's destruction. You came here to kill the last human. Instead, you are going to die where 18 billion of my people died before you. The response came quickly. Emperor Zexthan's insectoid face appeared on Jake's main screen, compound eyes glittering with rage and mandibles clicking in agitation. "Human, your rebellion ends here," the Emperor hissed in accented English. "My fleet will reduce you to atoms, and with your death, the galaxy will know that resistance to the Zephyrian Empire is futile." Jake smiled coldly. "Your empire is already dead. It just doesn't know it yet. But before I finish burying it, I want you to see something." Jake activated a system-wide broadcast that reached every ship in both fleets. The transmission began showing recorded footage from the human genocide. Families running in terror as Zephyrian weapons burned their cities, children crying as their parents died protecting them, entire populations being systematically exterminated by alien invaders. "These are the people you murdered," Jake said as the footage continued. 18 billion individuals with names, families, dreams, and hopes for the future. You classified them as a threat and decided they had no right to exist. Now I want you to see their faces as you join them in death. The psychological impact of the broadcast was immediate. Many of the alien crews serving in the Zephyrian fleet had never seen detailed footage of their empire's genocidal campaigns. They had been told that humans were dangerous monsters that needed to be eliminated for galactic security. Instead, they saw ordinary people trying to protect their loved ones as overwhelming military force destroyed everything they had built. But Jake was not done. As the footage played, he began activating the weapon systems he had spent months installing throughout the Sol system. What appeared to be space debris suddenly revealed itself as massive kinetic projectiles aimed at precise points in the enemy formation. Dead asteroids opened to release swarms of automated attack drones. The system's damaged space stations came back to life as weapons platforms that had been waiting for this moment. Jake had turned the entire Sol system into a trap. Every piece of wreckage, every chunk of orbital debris, every seemingly harmless rock had been converted into a weapon designed specifically to exploit weaknesses in Zephyrian technology. The enemy had walked into a graveyard that was about to become their tomb. The battle that followed defied every principle of space warfare. Jake fought not with superior numbers or advanced technology, but with the accumulated rage of an extinct species and the creative fury of human determination. His weapons struck from impossible angles using the system's gravity wells and magnetic fields. Solar radiation was focused into coherent beams that burned through enemy shields. The wreckage of human civilization became projectiles that moved with the force of planets. Emperor Zexthan's fleet tried to respond with conventional tactics, but nothing in their military doctrine had prepared them for this kind of warfare. Their formations were designed to fight other organized fleets, not to survive in an environment where every piece of matter had been weaponized against them. As the battle raged, Jake continued his psychological assault. He broadcast the personal records of every human who had died in the genocide, forcing the enemy to hear names and see faces of their victims. He showed them footage of human children playing, human families celebrating, human scientists making discoveries that could have benefited the entire galaxy. "You could have shared the universe with us," Jake said, as his weapons tore through another Zephyrian battle group. "Instead you chose genocide. Now you get to experience what you gave my people. Total extinction." The broadcast had an unexpected effect on the Zephyrian fleet. Ships began turning on each other as member species crews realized the full scope of what they had participated in. Krex engineers sabotaged their own vessels rather than continue fighting for an empire that planned to exterminate them. Aquarian pilots abandoned their posts and fled in escape pods. Even some Zephyrian soldiers began refusing orders as the weight of their crimes became undeniable. Emperor Zexthan watched his carefully assembled fleet tear itself apart from within, while Jake's impossible weapons destroyed it from without. In desperation, he ordered his flagship to ram Jake's vessel, hoping to end the threat through direct action. But Jake had anticipated this move. As the massive dreadnought accelerated toward him, he activated his final surprise. The seemingly primitive human cruiser revealed itself to be a technological masterpiece that combined the best of human engineering with 2 years of stolen Zephyrian science. It moved like a dancer through space, avoiding the Emperor's attack while its weapons carved the enemy flagship into pieces. Emperor Zexthan died not in glorious battle as he had always imagined, but trapped in the wreckage of his own arrogance. His empire's greatest fleet was destroyed not by superior force, but by the determination of a single human who refused to let his species die unavenged. As the last Zephyrian ship exploded or fled the system, Jake stood alone among the ruins of two civilizations. But he was not truly alone anymore. Ships from dozens of liberated species were entering the system, their crews coming to witness the final victory over the Empire that had terrorized the galaxy for a millennium. Representatives from the Aquarians, the Kethmari, the resurrected survivors of extinct species, and even former Zephyrian member species who had turned against their masters gathered in the Sol system to honor the human who had made their freedom possible. Jake planted a small human flag in the radioactive soil of Earth, the blue and white banner looking fragile against the dead planet's scarred surface. Around him stood beings from across the galaxy, all united by their shared experience of liberation from tyranny. "They thought they killed us all," Jake said quietly, his words broadcast to the assembled fleets. "They were wrong. As long as one human remembers, humanity survives. And as long as humanity survives, tyranny will never be safe." The galaxy had learned a lesson that would echo through history. Never underestimate the power of human determination, creativity, and the absolute refusal to surrender in the face of impossible odds. The Zephyrian Empire had made a fatal mistake when they let one human survive. That mistake had cost them everything.